For the person who said beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Have you ever played D&D? Greetings, and welcome to Mediocre Minis. Painting eyes is a pain in the butt. Let's be honest here. We all know what they look like, we all know how they're supposed to look like, but painting them on small miniatures is just a pain. Since eyes are such a pain to paint, I've devised a simple and easy way to be able to paint them quickly, effectively, and they bring your miniatures up to a great tabletop standard. But first, right before we begin, there's a few things I'd like to go over. Call this the table of contents. Now, the first thing we have, of course, is, well, this. It's the intro and table of contents. You're already there. Good job. Second, we're going to take a look and see what eyes are, and more specifically, what they are not, in regards to miniature painting. Then we'll move on to the tools of the trade, and get into what you'll be needing to complete this process and to get some eyes on your minis relatively quickly. Now, after all of that, then we'll get down to actually painting. It's a quick and easy 4-step process that we'll go over to actually get basic eyes on your miniatures. With the basic process down, then we'll move into looking to different types of miniatures that aren't specifically the ones shown, including Reaper miniatures, and even some completed models that you can go back to and paint faces and eyes on. The next portion is probably what will be my favorite part of the video, troubleshooting. There's a good chance you're going to run into some issues along the way, and hopefully this area and this section can help you out and get you moving again quickly. And then we have our penultimate section. What if you're still running into issues and nothing's really working? There's a few last minute things you can try, change up, or at least take into your consideration to hopefully be able to get a hold of some eyes. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with a quick conclusion. So before we really dive into things, let's take a look at what eyes really are, at least in the context of miniature painting. So when you first sit down to paint eyes, you might think of doing something like this. But you might notice when you do it this way, it's a little bit off. You have the whites of the eye, no problem, and you have the iris in the center, but it looks really weird. More specifically, this looks a little bit bug-eyed. And that's because your eyes really aren't like that in reality. When you take a look at your eyes and you zoom in real close, your iris actually takes up the majority of your eye that you see. Your eyelids cover most of, the whites of your eyes. And when you look, it's really mostly just iris and, of course, your pupil, but you don't really see too much of the white of your eye. Now, this is important to remember because your first instinct might be to dot the eye, but that's really not what we're doing here. The iris takes up a lot more space than what you're probably used to and what you might think. So, as we get into this, keep in mind that you're not just putting a dot, we're actually making the eye a lot bigger than what you might think it actually is. Chapter 3, Tools of the Trade and Stuff that you're going to need. First and foremost, of course, you're going to need a miniature. Oh, and make sure your miniature is primed. You always want to prime your minis. If you're unsure why, take a look at this old video of mine that I go over priming process and why it's important. Second, you're going to need, obviously, a paintbrush. Duh, that's how you paint. This paintbrush, you can use whatever you have. However, I would look for the sharpest and the most pointiest and the best paintbrush tip you have. The sharper and better condition, the better and easier this is going to be in the long run. Now, if you don't necessarily have a very sharp paintbrush tip, that's okay. There's a few things we can work on and do later on that can hopefully still get you some nice looking eyes, even if you don't have the pointiest of tips. Now, don't worry if you do not have a brush with an extremely point tip. There are many ways that you can still complete eyes and get them to look very good, even if the equipment that you have isn't necessarily completely up to the highest of standards. After your paintbrush, you, of course, need paint. All you really need, you're going to need 3 shades of paint for this. That's all you're going to need. First, it's going to be the base tone that you want your skin to be. For this example, I'm using Bugman's Glow by Games Workshop. Another color you're going to need is the iris color. What do you want your eyes to be? You can choose, again, any color of the rainbow works well for eyes. For this example, I'm using Jade from Pro Acryl's paint line. And finally, you're going to need a off-white paint. This will serve as the whites of your eyes. Now, keep in mind, I said off-white, not white itself. You actually don't want to use a pure white or bright white. And here's kind of why. If you take a look at these two miniatures here, these two heads, one of which is painted in a bright white, the other is painted in a off-white. Can you tell the difference? Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, but this one here is the bright white. And the reason why you don't want to do that on a whole face is it's just too bright. It stands out too much. It'll look like your eyes are headlights shining in the dark. So an off-white is always best when it comes to your eyes. Over the course of this video, you will mostly see me using Ivory from Pro Acryl, though any of these will work out nicely. Again, you can use whatever off-white you have, but I would just avoid any bright white. Finally, the last thing that you need is patience. This will take a few attempts, it's going to take a few tries, but don't worry, I believe that you can get this. It's going to be 4 simple steps. So just relax, grab your brush, grab your models, grab your paints, and now we can finally start painting. So there are 4 simple steps. Ironic that this is step 4 after all. First step is relatively simple and straightforward. Just base coat the face. Yeah, that's it. Simply use your base coat of choice, whatever color flesh tone you're going for, and just base coat the face. You don't need to do anything fancy here. When in doubt with base coating, just follow the wise words of the patron saint of painting, Duncan Rhodes. Just use 2 thin coats. Then you paint down, put 2 coats on, and call it done. If you don't have full complete coverage, that's fine. You're not going to need it. We're going to go back in later and add more base tone later on. So if your face isn't completely opaque, that's fine. This is just to get started and just to lay down a base coat of paint on your primed face. Do that, let it dry, you can move right on to step 2. Step 2, the off-white. Grab whatever off-white you want or that you will be using for this miniature. Grab your off-white, put a little bit on your brush, and paint in the eye. Now, what's going to make this even easier for you is you're not worried about just the whites of your eye. That's way too small. We don't need to do that. Paint the whole eye socket white. Yeah, just do the whole area. Yeah, I'm being serious. Just do it. Now, of course, don't go too crazy. You don't want to have to repaint the entire face, but just cover the area. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be inside the lines. We're going to go back and do that later. Right now, you're just getting the eye white. Now, of course, this is a good time to work on brush control. It's a good time to work on your breathing and holding your brush and being able to get into small spaces. It's good practice, but if you don't, it's not a big deal. We're going to be fixing this, so you don't need to dot the eye. Just go around it a little bit. Do what you can, and then, of course, let the paint dry. All right, step 3. We're over halfway done. Step 3 involves your iris color of choice. Get a small amount of iris color on your brush, ensuring that you have a good tip. This is where the fine tip of the brush comes into play. Get yourself a good tip, and what you will need to do is simply draw a line straight through the eye. You're going outside the lines here. You're not just filling in the eye. You're painting a line right down the face, from the forehead down to the cheek. Just put a line in there. When you get to the other side, put another line in there. And that will serve as your iris. That's all you're going to do. Put a line straight down the center of your eye and let it dry. The only thing you need to worry about at this point is that you have some white on the outside and on the inside of that line. Now, 2 things to keep in mind as you do this. First and foremost, you want to make sure you have a good tip on your brush. And a good way to get a good tip on your brush is by simply giving it a twist. When you're loading up your brush on your palette, simply spin the brush in your fingers as you drag the paintbrush across the paper. When you're doing so, it will twist all the bristles up and bring it to a nice fine tip. Very simple action. Before you know it, you'll be doing it all the time. Second, if you're not exactly sure where to draw your line, look straight down your mini. Then put your paintbrush between your mini and your face. Think of it as staring down the shaft of an arrow as you're about to fire it, or just looking through a long tube. That's it. Just look at your mini, put your paintbrush right up next to it, and use your own eyes to stare into the mini's eyes directly head on, and use that as your guide. Now, I ain't gonna lie, it might look a little weird staring this way. I'll tell you what, might help you out. Step 4, touch up. With the whites of the eyes cured and dried, with the iris drawn through the face, now all you gotta do is just touch up the face, and the base coat of the face more specifically. Put that some on your brush, and then just go back in and slowly yet surely cover up the white that you've previously painted and cover up your iris color. You're creating the eye from what is probably a blob on your face. As opposed to putting the eye on the face, you are making the eye by subtraction rather than addition. This will probably be the hardest part. This will take the most time, and it's going to be probably the most frustrating. I know it's a pain, but I know you can do it. And once you are completed, you'll notice that you'll have, again, 2 very nicely formed eyes on the center of your face, an iris drawn right down through the middle, and a little bit of whites of your eyes on both sides of the iris. Before you know it, you're done. So that's it. 4 simple steps to get basic eyes on your face. Again, you are starting off with a large area and slowly closing it into the eye, not just filling in the eye there. So keep that in mind. Go slow. It's going to work out nicely. So now that we have the process done, let's take a look at how this would work on a few other heads that might be a little bit trickier to paint. For instance, here I have 3 miniatures from Reaper. The first 2 are your regular Reaper Bones, and I believe the last one, the gray miniature, the Dwarf, is considered Bones Black and a new type of process that they use for creation of their miniatures. However, I find that this painting process works pretty much the same as it does on any other model. Simply base coat the face as you would with your flesh tone, add in the whites of the eyes. After that's dried, add in a line for your iris, then go back in and touch it up. Of course, this will take a little bit of work, since the eyes aren't necessarily always the easiest to get to. This dwarf, for instance, was a little bit tricky since the warhammer that he has kind of takes up a little bit of space, and that made it a little bit hard. Now you might be thinking eyes are great, but what about if you don't have eyes? Say, a helmet. Well, good news is it works pretty much the same exact way, except this time you don't even need an iris most of the time. Taking a look at the Space Marine helmet, for instance. Base coat the model in whatever flavor of marine you wish. Dot the lens with whatever color lens you wish. And then go back and simply reestablish your base tone. With that, you will now have a nice clean lens for your Space Marine. So let's take a look at how this actually works in practicality. For example, I worked on this Sister of Battle miniature to see how long could this actually take? Like, how effective can this be if you were looking to get eyes a specific way? Well, it took me about 8 to 10 minutes in total. Most of that was waiting. In fact, the majority of that was waiting. I'd say 95% of it was waiting. Because when you're doing one model and you're looking to get the eyes just right, you gotta wait for the paint to dry. I mean, seriously, let the paint dry. And then you can go back in, make your adjustments, and then if you screw up, you can simply base coat it again, and then you gotta wait for it to dry. And just keep in mind, most of what you're gonna run into is waiting. Chapter 6, Troubleshooting. This is probably gonna be my favorite part of the video, going over some of the things you might run into, and more specifically, how to correct some of the problems you might have. One of the first things we'll look at is you have a hard time seeing the eye socket. When you have an eye that is very difficult to see or very hard to get to, there's a few things that you can do. First, try to use thinner paint. You don't want to gunk up all of the fine detail, or limit how many base coats you initially put down. Say 1 coat of your flesh tone to establish the base tone, and then 1 simple coat of white on your eyes. However, there is one other thing that you can do, and I do it pretty much this entire video. Yeah, the answer is magnification. One of the things you can do, of course, is get a set of glasses somewhat similar to these so you can magnify the miniatures that are in front of you. A lot of people actually do this, and almost this entire video was filmed with me wearing these so I can see all of these eyes in nice detail. You don't need anything too fancy. Even a 1x magnification can do wonders. So any type of set like this can work out nicely for you. Another idea when it comes to magnification and not being able to see too well is a device somewhat similar to this. I actually got this off of my wife, Vault Fox, and it has a magnifying glass, which is part of it. You can set this up, of course, on your desk and have the miniature behind it and look through the looking glass, so to speak, to see your models. So something along this could work. I believe this was designed for soldering and soldering wires and other small parts together. So that is an option as well if you are looking for another way to magnify your miniatures without actually having to put something upon your face. Another issue you might run into while painting is the iris color just goes all over the place. It doesn't matter how sharp of a tip you have, it just seems to go all over. And if it goes all over, such as it's very runny, your paint might be a little bit too thin. Try a little bit thicker of a paint for your iris color. Sometimes if your paint's too thin, it gets too wash-like or too glaze-like, and it'll just run over and outline the eye as opposed to draw a straight line. Yeah, try a little bit thicker of a paint, and that might help establish your lines a lot better if the paint seems to be a little bit too runny. Conversely, on the flip side, if your paint is too thick and it leaves a big old blob and you can't see anything other than the iris color or any color you lay down, your paint might be a little bit too thick. You can add in a small amount of water or other type of glaze or types of acrylic mediums to help thin it out, but a little water can go a long way so that you get a nice even flow and be able to cover the area that you wish. Here's a good one. The paint won't actually show up on the model. You put it on the brush, you dab it on the face, but it's not showing up. Take a look at the brush that you have. Your brush might be actually too small. See, if you use a very small or very tiny paintbrush, which is what you might think that you might want to use, the paint can dry out too quickly. And if the paint dries out on your brush, well, then it's not going to go anywhere. Looking at these two paintbrushes here, one, of course, being very small, which you would think might help, but it doesn't hold a lot of paint, and it could dry out really quickly. Remember, we're using very tiny amounts of paint here. It doesn't last too long on the brush. Using a larger brush with a good tip, the paint can stay wet longer, you can work with it longer, and still allows you to draw all of these nice lines. However, if all you have is a very tiny brush and you really want to use a very tiny brush, you can. But there's two things you can do. One, simply move faster, which when you're learning and practicing can be a little bit rough. Second is use something called retarder. And the painting retarder, effectively all it does is slow down your drying time. Mix a tiny bit in with your paint, and you should get enough working time to be able to help you draw and paint in the features that you want. All right, two more. First, you can get one eye, but not the other. It's odd, you might think. Why can I easily get in and cover and base coat one area and it look really nice, but the other side looks like a train wreck? Are you right or left-handed? Seriously, that actually might be part of it. And it has nothing to do with skill or which is your dominant hand. It's what side of the miniature you're painting with your dominant hand. See, for example here, taking a look at this miniature, it will be the left side of their face or their left eye in the end that I am painting with my right hand. A piece of cake. I can go in from the side, I can paint it all up, no problem. The other side, you are going over the nose, and you are starting off with the tear duct and going out as opposed to the other way around. The point is, if you're struggling to get one eye, let's turn the miniature upside down. Yeah, just turn the head upside down. And this can work well with any type of miniature or anything that you're painting. Just flip it over, and if maybe that area of reach will be a lot easier for you. Again, I'm right-handed. So anything when I paint on this side will be easier just because I have easier access. The other side, I gotta not only cross over top of my body, but I also need to go over the physical nose of the miniature itself. So rotating the miniature around, that can actually help you out a lot with the other side of the face. And one more. The eyes look huge. If your eyes look way too big, there are two things you can do. Of course, you can still reestablish your base tone like we had in step 4 before, making the eye smaller and smaller. But also, do not forget the upper eyelid in this portion of your eye. I tend to forget it, and I know I've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. This area between your upper eyelid and your eyebrow. Make sure you hit that with some of your flesh tone. It actually brings your eyes a little bit smaller from the top. Give that a shot and see if that makes them look a little bit less huge. Chapter 7. What else can you do? So you're sitting down at your painting desk, you're working really hard, you're having a good time, and all of a sudden, your palms are sweaty, your knees are weak, your arms and your legs are heavy, there's vomit all over your sweater already, and your mom's spaghetti. No, seriously, your bodily functions can actually really impact your painting over time. So I would suggest, if you are still struggling or having some difficulties, paint the eyes first when you sit down. You're probably human. It means you probably get a little bit tired. So over time, you will, of course, get tired. Eye strain. You're staring at something so small and intricate for so long. Do the eyes before your body catches up with you. Get it done, get it taken care of, so when you start losing dexterity in your fingers and you're not getting the brush where you want it to go, you're not struggling with eyes at that point. It's already done. What you put into your body can also have a great impact on your painting. For instance, have you had caffeine today, either through pop, tea, or coffee? How about kicking back with a nice cold one after work or later in the day? Alcohol can have an impact just as much as caffeine. Are you hydrated? Everyone could probably use with a little bit more water in our lives, so if you're a little bit dehydrated, that can also be affecting your ability to paint. And of course, nicotine. If you happen to use nicotine in any form, that can also cause you some issues or concerns whenever you're painting. So if you're still having struggles and you're not quite sure, think about what you're putting into your body before you sit down at the painting desk. 2 more things, I promise. Next, what if the eyes are really just small and they're just too damn small, Brian? What do? Well, in that case, there are a few options. The first thing you do is darken down your base tone of your skin with a little bit of brown or red or black, depending on the flesh tone of your choice, and paint that in. Effectively, your eyes will kind of look like they are not only closed, but under shadow. It's just a little bit shaded. Think of a less extreme version of The Godfather during the movie, well, The Godfather, where you don't necessarily see eyes. Another thing you can do is just make the eyes all one color. For instance, the heck with it, just make all the eyes jade. Who cares? They're, you get the point. You don't need the whites of the eyes. Just fill in one color and say the heck with it. However, I would avoid black. I would not use the just black for eyes if you intend to make it one color, because you look a little weird, maybe a little creepy. Yeah, unless that's a look you're going for, I would not choose black, but something else. A very dark gray could work if you want that type of aesthetic, but not as intense, or just whatever color you want the iris to be, just paint it that color. Finally, the end. What if your brushes just aren't quite what you want? Well, what you can do if you don't have necessarily a fine tip is just work in reverse. Yeah, I know, it's weird. Now you're doing this all backwards. Yeah, let's do it backwards. For instance, fill in the eye socket in the area with a iris color that you like. Go into the sides, and then add in a small amount of white to each side, and then go back in with your base tone afterwards. I ain't gonna lie, this one is probably the trickiest. It's not necessarily as clean, it's a little bit difficult, and I found to be a little bit more frustrating when I tried it on my own. However, it does work. It can work. And with a little bit of time and practice, I probably would get a little bit better at it. But it's not ideal, but it can work. Just do the process backwards, and that could potentially work for you as well if you don't have a super sharp point on your paintbrush tip. And there we have it. Basic eyes for your miniatures. I know it takes a little bit of practice, and there's a lot of information that we have here, so hopefully this provided you with some help. And if you do try this out, let me know how it goes. I am very curious to see how this works out for you if you do so. If you are interested in looking at the miniature heads that I have used, I have a link to my mini factory down below for Ketaminies. While I initially backed this on Kickstarter, you can still find them here. How about you? How do you paint eyes? Do you dot the eye or do it the inverse way where you just dot the eye once you're done? Do you do your eyes last? Have you tried this before? Am I insane? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Thank you again for watching. This has been Mediocre Minis, and may the divine light your path.